give them a proof because in some senses they understand, they recognize this voice within them that's not them. See, their voice is to go for the cookie jar. But there's this other voice, not them, that's saying not to. Now, what is the source of that voice? You can't say it's Darwinian. It makes no sense. That voice requires some acknowledgement and some explanation. And I'm saying the transcendent hypothesis is a better explanation than any rival one. It certainly isn't morality that we've made up. We might make up whether we want to live according to it. But to say we make up the morality itself, give me a break.
It's a good statement of the case, Bhajanesh, that our morality is innate to us, though, and not given.
Okay, next question.
I'd first like to thank both of you guys for coming here.
It's a pleasure.
And my question is for Mr. Hitchens. Is there a difference between the greatest conceivable being, or the laws of nature, and a God, one that is not sentient? And if there is none, do you support the ontological argument? I assume you're familiar with that.
I got the ontological last bit. Could you speak up a little?
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there any difference between the greatest conceivable being in the ontological argument and a God that is not sentient, one that Mr. D'Souza would argue for? And if there is none, would you not support the ontological argument, which could in many cases prove the existence of God?
The shortcoming of the ontological argument, tempting though it can be, is that it assumes we could conceive. Well, one of the shortcomings is assuming that we're able to conceive something than which nothing greater can be conceived. It would be difficult for us, I think, to be able to stretch our minds to that limit of conception and not award sentience, because that seems to me, though again, you're always hovering on the verge of tautology here, greatness to us is in some way indissoluble from consciousness or sentience. This would still leave us with the problem of where the being was that had created this greatest conceivable being. It still leads you to an infinite regression. If it was any good, it would have worked by now, the ontological argument.
Okay.
In the interest of time, we'll move in. I have a lot to say on this argument, and I do in my book, but I'm going to let it go because I'd like to take more questions.
Okay, next question.
This question is for Mr. D'Souza. But after hearing you butcher evolutionary theory with your two bunny rabbit discussion, I wonder whether it'll fall on deaf ears. But could I ask your opinion of relatively recent cognitive discoveries of how religion is hijacking normal human behavior, normal cognitive processes like love and fear and the credulity of children, etc., etc. Do you look into that from a scientific perspective?
Who are your sources?
Pascal Boyer, Anderson Thompson, Heather Fisher.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Boyer's work, so let me address that. First of all, I want to begin by saying it's very easy to make an accusation. You've butchered evolutionary theory. Clearly, if I had butchered it so obviously, you'd be able to say how. But all you could do is make the allegation and then skate on as if the allegation sustains itself. So I'll stick with the rabbits and move on to Pascal Boyer. You have grossly misstated Pascal Boyer's work in saying that it somehow demonstrates. I don't think he would say it demonstrates anything. It's ultimately an effort to look at the evolutionary roots of religion. And what this body of scholarship does is it argues that religion is hardwired to some degree in the human brain. Now, by the way, I want to point to an aspect of this research that you should be aware of, because this is research that actually shows correlations and proves absolutely nothing. It's a little bit... In fact, the research, in a sense, was available 100 years ago. Everybody knows that if you give someone a heavy blow to their head, they lose consciousness. And so the argument is that the brain must cause consciousness, because without a brain, no consciousness. Similarly, if you find a guy who prays, you can, through magnetic resonance imaging, look and see which parts of the brain light up, and you can jump to the conclusion, hey, that's the religious center in the brain that is causing the religious experience. I want to point out that logically there are non sequiturs buried in all this. After all, if I see a bright light and something lights up in my brain, it doesn't mean that my brain reaction is causing the light. There is an external experience that my brain is reacting to, and yet the assumption of people who find religious node centers in the brain is that these node centers are fabricating the religious experience. So I think what's going on here is far from science demonstrating atheism. Atheism is trying to hijack itself as a premise of science. It's ultimately presuming clearly there's no external experience. So if I can find the part of the brain that lights up spiritually, I have proven that religion is an illusion and there's no external experience there whatsoever. Now, first of all, the Declaration of Independence speaks of what it calls a decent respect of the opinions of mankind. 99% of all Homo sapiens on this planet from the beginning of time have had not only the belief in God, but in many cases the experience of God. They feel an experience of God in their lives. This is all empirical data. It's experience. Can this all be written off as illusion? Oh yeah, but I know 10 guys who claim to have seen UFOs. Yeah, but you show me 5 billion guys who have seen UFOs and I'll be searching for them myself. In other words, once you accumulate enough observational data, you've got to take the experience seriously. So I think the question, in a sense, reveals precisely the kind of arrogance that tends to write off religious experience, pretend that science has proven things that it has far from proven, and invoke authorities who would be embarrassed to be invoked in this context.
Can I just say very quickly, I think you ought to be suspicious of your own argument here, Dinesh. The quantity theory has huge dangers to it. For one thing, we don't know that many people who attended services made worshipping noises and so forth, they were doing so voluntarily. We've no means of establishing that. We do know what would have happened to them if they hadn't made these professions of faith, and we know what did happen to many who tried to ask even the most elementary questions about it. In societies like our own, which are not subject to direct religious coercion, the figure for people who have some kind of belief is much more like 85 than 99%. A good number of people, not all of them stupid, are born, if you like, without the ability to place themselves in a faith position. They just can't do it. I know because I'm one of them. It may be a deformity, a cognitive one, for all I know. I don't think that it is. But if we're going to argue that nature makes a lot of people feel religious, which I certainly don't doubt, I think the majority of people have most of the time been at least somewhat religious, then you must concede also that there's a large minority of people for whom that is not so.
Okay.
And I do.
Thank you. Next question.
My question is to Mr. Hitchens. We have a theist and an atheist before us, but could it not also be stated that we are all agnostic with leanings towards or against God?
Well, Thomas Huxley, who was Darwin's great champion, is a man I respect in many ways, and his famous debate with Bishop Wilberforce is an imperishable document at the Museum of Natural History in Oxford. But I often feel I can't thank him for inventing the word agnostic, which he did. I think the word, I hope this is interesting to you, it's a product really of Darwin's own wish that his theory not be harmful to Christianity. He hoped very much when he first evolved it that the origin of species and the theory of natural selection was going to be compatible with faith. It took him a long time to decide that, at least in the form that faith then took, it wasn't going to be compatible. It took him a long time to go on and lose his own personal faith, which was actually for other reasons. But the word comes to us from this attempt at a compromise. I myself, perhaps temperamentally, am more in favor of making a pretty strict choice and not avoiding or temporizing these things. I think if you come to the conclusion that no serious or believable or credible evidence for the existence of a supreme being, let alone a benign